Hey, it's Mike Kearney.
And Deb Golden,
hosts of the Resilient Podcast.
You've been hearing a lot about the COVID crisis with Mike, and that's not going to change.
But we recognize you may also be looking for insights that can help you make decisions and take action as we emerge from the crisis.
As we come together to meet the challenges and embrace the opportunities crisis brings, we're going to be bringing more resilient content you've come to expect from us.
You'll still get the unfiltered leadership insights you've come to rely on from Resilient. Whether you're a new listener in the Confronting the COVID-19 series, or you've been with us from the beginning.
We hope you enjoy this episode on cyber topics. After all, cyber's everywhere.
10 years ago, we never could have predicted the cyber landscape as it is today. As cyber continues to evolve, so does the role of the CISO. With each day passing, CISOs are gradually taking on more responsibility as their role shifts from a traditional risk manager to a business enabler. From engagement with the board and leadership down to the manufacturing process, CISOs have their hands in nearly all aspects of business today. Welcome to the Resilient Podcast, where we feature resilient leaders, real insights, and unfiltered stories. My name is Deb Golden, and I'm the U.S. leader of Deloitte Advisory's Cyber Risk Services practice. As a part of our cyber series, I have the pleasure of speaking with Betsy Wille, Divisional Vice President and CISO at Abbott. In this episode, Betsy shares her perspective on the changing role of the CISO and how healthcare organizations can maintain a patient-first mindset in today's technology-driven environment. She also discusses the challenge of demonstrating the value of security to the business and ways cyber executives can leverage data as a means to that end.
What do our patients and consumers expect out of us, and what's important to the business and its growth and where it's headed? And then how is cybersecurity and the protections we put in place, protecting that and allowing that to move forward? Because we know every other day we read about a new headline of either a significant operational impact from a cyber event or a data breach. All of those distract from the mission of the organization.
Betsy brings so much to the table with her experience managing cyber in both the financial services and life sciences and healthcare industries, and I absolutely love the way she lights up when she talks about her vision for future leaders and how she's giving back to her local community. We had a lot of fun, and I'm absolutely excited to share this episode with you. Listen now for my conversation with Betsy Wille. Well, hello and welcome to the latest edition of this podcast. I am so excited to have Betsy Wille, Divisional Vice President and CISO at Abbott with us today. So hello, how are you today?
Hi, Deb. I'm doing great, thanks. And I have to tell you, this is actually my first podcast.
Oh, well, I'm excited to be your first podcast. This is going to be great. It's going to be like we're just sitting together, chatting, having coffee or drinks or doing whatever we might do to be able to talk about lots of exciting things today. So I'm super excited to have you here at the podcast, especially since it's your first one.
Yes, perfect.
Wonderful. Well, for the audience to get to know you a little bit, maybe you could give us a little bit about your background. I am ecstatic to know that you are an avid runner, and if I understand correctly, you've completed more than a dozen marathons. And so maybe just a little snippet about, how did you fall in love with running? Definitely not one of my favorite things. I love to work out, but I've never gotten into the jam of running. So maybe, how'd you get started? When did you get started? What keeps you motivated about running?
I actually started running as an adult, so I didn't do a lot of sports growing up. I was a little bit more of a kind of academic theater kid, and but my dad was a runner, and he's run for over 40 years, still does in his early 70s. He's out there 6-7 days a week, and really loved running. And so I grew up going to his races and being part of that, but I didn't really catch the bug until I was in my early 20s, and I ran my first marathon when I was 25, and I was looking for, kind of something to fall into. And I actually had a couple friends that ran the Chicago Marathon the year before. And I went out to support them and to watch them. And if you've ever gone to the marathon course, you know that you just kind of get caught up in the vibe of it all and excitement. I went, I want to do that. And so I kind of set my mind to it, got into, training and built up to it. And then, yes, did my first when I was 25, and then have done 14 in total. And I just, for me, it really, it started as maybe more of a kind of a health thing, but now it really is a way for me to just have some balance. And when I go out out for a run, I'm really, nobody's boss. I'm nobody's spouse, friend, daughter, parent, any of that. I'm just out there running, and it helps me clear my mind. And actually, I listen to a lot of podcasts when I run because I like to kind of focus on something. So now Resilient will be, on the playlist going forward. But I think specifically marathons that has taught me a lot about just persistence, because it's 26.2 miles. You do 18 to 20 weeks of training to get ready for it. And inevitably there are points, whether it's in the training or on the course, where you go, oh, what am I doing? And why am I doing this? And my body is sore and I'm tired. And I think I'm just going to have to stop. And it's in those moments where you kind of go, yeah, but if I stop now, I'm still gonna be tired. I'm still gonna be sore, and I'm not gonna have a medal for it. So you might as well just finish. And I apply some of that to my life, and particularly in the role I'm in now. There are the days you come home and are just exhausted and go, oh, and you take some time, you refresh, spend some time with the family, and you get up the next morning and get after it. So I do believe that particularly the marathon and that kind of distance has taught me a lot of that persistence.
Well, I love the slogan, get after it. And speaking of getting after it, I read that in your initial college aspirations was to pursue journalism, and you ultimately made your way to business administration with a focus on master's in information systems. And so I'm curious how you went from journalism, or what intrigued you from going from one to the other, in terms of not only just your background and kind of like, what did you think about when you said journalism and then, oh, wait, maybe business administration, but also, just being able to pivot from one to the other. And then I guess also personally, I'm curious, do you still do things around journalism? Is writing an inspiration for you, or is it more about media and that kind of outlet?
So I'll start with when I was young. I actually always kind of thought I wanted to go into business because I used to play Office. So I actually had a play phone. I had notepads. I mean, an office supply store today is still one of my favorite places. And so my mom would say that I used to love putting people on hold and doing all that. So I actually think that business was really always where I wanted to be. What happened was, when I was in high school, I got involved in our newspaper and eventually became the editor my senior year. And so everybody said, well, so you're going to journalism, right? And I thought, well, yeah, I guess so, right? That makes a lot of sense. And I went to University of Illinois and started in the journalism program, joined the radio station there in the news department, and then had kind of an epiphany the first semester or so, which was, oh, I'm going to be covering the Champaign City Council meeting for like the first 10 years of my career as a journalist. And I'm not sure that's really what I was after. And then it occurred to me of, you know what? I don't know that I was a great journalist. I was a good editor because I was good at managing people and bringing things together. And so I kind of had this realization that really it's been business all along. I just, rose to kind of the editor role because of my ability to bring people together and paint that bigger picture. And so where I pivoted back into the business school. But I will say that I was actually going down the path of organizational design kind of emphasis. And I went and met with a teacher of the organizational design class. That is important in a second here, and I said, this is going to be my major. I'm really excited. And he looked at me and said, yeah, I don't know that you're going to find a job. Go into finance or computers. And on that one conversation alone, I went, well, I'm pretty good at computers. I mean, I'm not afraid of them. I mean, back in that day, I was really good at Lotus 1, 2, 3, but I'm dating myself a little bit. But I thought, that, okay. And I changed my, focus and graduated with a technology degree, and kind of the rest is history from that.
Well, it's a great history, and at the end of the day, you see the whole connection with the radio station. So this podcast is just bringing you right back to your old days of being at the radio station.
I'm having flashbacks. It feels really good. But I do think, on that note, though, is the communication side is important in everything that I do today, and being able to take complex topics like cybersecurity and talk about those to a range of people. That there's no doubt that the time I spent and the focus on communications has been really important in my career.
No, and obviously communication and technology, given what we're doing today's day and age, I'm not sure about you, but I mean, I can't live without my mobile ordering and my grocery delivery and my other ability to be able to get things, whether that be everything from food and groceries, as well as things to having video teleconferencing with my doctors. So at the end of the day, I think the basis for technology and then obviously also communication are key, particularly as things more and more get automated through this great notion of a virtually connected environment. So I love the connection between that. I guess one other quick thing before we get into shop talk is you've mentioned a couple of things that drove you obviously through your childhood and then obviously through college. Is there any person, we often talk about moments that matter. Is there someone in your life, whether it be personally or professionally, a leader or a family member, that really was somebody to you that really made that moment that matters to you in your career?
There have been several, so I have to recognize that there are a number of influences, but I would say more recently would be the individual that I worked for in my last role, the CISO at that company. He was somebody that I had known for a number of years. I joined his leadership team, and he is the one that I think probably started and planted the seed, for me of looking to aspire into a CISO role. While I have spent my entire career in cybersecurity and in a number of the domains, I'm not sure that I quite had my sights on this leadership role until I started to work for him, and he saw something in me, and then what I think is really important, and I talk about this oftentimes when I talk about mentorship, is that it wasn't just that he encouraged me or gave me advice. There was a real thoughtful investment in what it would take to be prepared to be in this role. And so he not only gave me those opportunities to get that experience, but then really importantly, I think, is he opened up his network to me, and let's be honest about the world that we're in, and certainly the cybersecurity industry where women tend to be underrepresented. There are just some tables and environment that we're not naturally kind of not invited into, but part of. And the fact that he was there as a CISO and said, "Here, let me introduce you, let me bring you into these environments and open up that network," I think was really influential in then my ability to kind of prepare and be ready for this role. So that one is certainly pivotal. Now, I will also say that every so often when I have a hard day, I call him up and blame him for having planted that seed. But ultimately, that was really impactful.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times people underestimate the value of a network. So to hear not only your ability to create and expand the network, but for someone to really open their network up to you, I think it's something that's a lost art. And sometimes people are floundering. I mean, whether they know so or not, but just it's like either A, I want to do it on my own, or B, I don't even know where to start. Going to people and asking them to help understand their network, and the fact that you had someone that was so transparent to be able to provide you with that, and then you to make it your own, which obviously you've done, but just to be able to have that connectivity, I think the network is certainly, like I said, an undervalued at times attribute of moving through personally and professionally careers. So I'm so happy to hear that you brought forward the example of being able to build a network and having a mentor who was able to provide that to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I noticed in speaking about, being able to build things and moving forward, you've shifted quite a bit in terms of some of your industry, right? From financial services into pharmaceuticals. How do you, and maybe it was along the same lines of having some of this network, but how have you been able to build up your credibility in kind of this new industry and a new role? Have you found that to be a challenge? Are there things that kind of help you get through the moment, if you will, in terms of looking at it from an industry perspective?
In the industry perspective, I came to realize actually there's a lot of similarities. So I started my career and spent a number, 18 or so years in financial services, where our focus was protecting people's money and livelihood and the ability to achieve their goals through, their financial means. And now I've switched into a global healthcare company where we are focused on protecting people's health and for those, people to be able to live their best lives because they are healthy. And so there's some real parallels in just the underlying mission. And so I've brought that certainly into the role to understand and connect to why we're here and why we do what we do, which is exciting. But then there are some real differences, and I'll tell you the biggest learning curve that I've gone through in this role over the last 9-10 months is in Abbott, we make devices and technology in that healthcare space, and that means we're a manufacturer. And so there's a whole realm of cybersecurity and cyber needs that come with that I just didn't have in the financial services space. So that has been really important for me to, as I come into this role, is to learn the business and really understand what we do all over the world, the spaces we're in, the markets we're in, the patients and the people that we serve, and learn. So I've used a lot of my inside the company, certainly, and our divisional business leaders to be educated on, but also then kind of reaching out into the new cybersecurity colleague space, and the information sharing groups that connect with folks in this role in healthcare.
And I think when you think about some of the comments you made earlier, even about your marathon training and the need to be persistent, it certainly seems like you've persisted through many of these to be able to pivot quite well, kind of pulling and drawing on attributes that perhaps you have in other roles or in other industries to really continue to drive and learn, right? I think part of growth for all of us is the continuation of learning and educating ourselves, as well as figuring out how to take some of those brass tacks, if you will, of what has made us successful to this point in time, and really being able to build and grow upon that. Even if sometimes, I don't know about you, but sometimes I don't even know what some of those may be. And it's just, again, that drive and that persistence to be able to push forward starts to pull and cull those together so that you can come forward in new environments, new industries, new challenges to be able to apply yourself and push forward. So again, I would assume that even if you were to pivot elsewhere, you would be equally as successful in doing that, given the backbone of what you've described. And so perhaps we can spend a little bit of time understanding, how do you take in your new role, how do you take kind of all the challenges of cyber? I mean, cyber is everywhere. It's something that we like to talk about quite often. It's in everything that we do, both internally in terms of how you run and operate your businesses, as well as externally when you're doing work with other businesses, consumers, constituents, et cetera. And so how do you try to boil all that down to the things that you really should focus on from a priorities perspective?
Well, not only is cyber everywhere, but I also like to say that cybersecurity is really about security. And so it's about protecting what matters most. And one of my jobs is and our organization is to break that down for folks that might feel a little bit overwhelmed by how broad of a topic it is or how technical it might seem, and really bring them back to understanding, a framework to think through what they should be concerned about and where they should focus their efforts, and ensuring that we're creating resiliency in the organization against a potential cyber event. And so a good analogy often to take people through is to talk about how they protect their homes and the types of layers of protection they put in place. So you've got your locks on your windows and doors, and that's kind of like your good, strong passwords and some of those key controls. But, and that'll keep out a good number of people, but it people can get past the locks. And so then you probably have an alarm system, a Nest system, something along those lines that triggers and alarms you and alerts you to something that may not make, or that isn't expected behavior. And those are the types of monitoring and response that we have in the security organization. And then further inside your home, you may have a safe with the truly kind of your true valuables, jewelry, money, etc. And that's another level of protection. And those are things like the encryption that we put on our most sensitive data. And so taking people through that framework, one of thinking about what really matters, what's important, and then how do I mix and match some of the controls to help reduce the risk of those important things being impacted, is often how we talk about it. Because I do get, and there are times I meet with some of our divisional business leaders who say, I don't know about this space, but I'm terrified. I'm like, I don't want you to be. I don't want you to be terrified. I want you to have a heightened sense of awareness that this is an important topic for you and your business, but I don't want you to be terrified. So let me give you some tools to understand it and to ask the right questions to your organization.
Yeah, and you bring up the point around needing to have that, again, back to communication, but the communication between both, the functional, the technical, and candidly the executive teams, because I think all of them require not only communication and coordination, but perhaps different types of ways to put into kind of perspective those items. And I think the overlay of risk particularly. So what is most important? What is the risk profile? What may I perhaps have to do differently because of that risk profile? And I think sometimes people, because they are scared or they are terrified or because a breach happens every single day, let's not be, naive to that point. It's going to happen, right? And so how do you make it more tangible and aware and digestible, if you will, to the audience so that you can really understand that risk profile? And then to your point, making sure you understand what really matters. So I like the ease with which you explain it. And I think being able to do that to various stakeholders is awfully critical as we think about the breadth of cyber. And so one thing I'd look to add to that a little bit is obviously in the role of CISO, kind of how do you think that has evolved? I mean, I don't know about you, but often when I'm speaking to the boards or to the leadership organizations, I've seen significant evolution of the questions that they're asking, how they're trying to identify, again, similarly, what's important to them. But at the board level, what do they do? What's the types of questions you're hearing, and how do you best prepare for kind of the uncertainty?
There's been such an evolution, and even in just my kind of observation, the time that I've been in this space, I almost see it as a continuum. So we started out, the early cyber leaders or information security leaders were often technologists and really skilled, and could talk about the network and could talk about, the tech talk of security. But oftentimes the people they were talking to couldn't follow, but they felt good that somebody understood it and somebody was out there to protect it. But then then we realized we needed to get into more of a teacher role, so that, and the leaders and the boards realized they need to understand this a little bit better. So the CISO role or the security role was to teach and to educate on, here are the threats that are out there. Here's why it's important for us to invest in this, in protecting the company. Here's why that's important. And I feel that it has now evolved, though, to really we have to be business leaders. So when I've gone into the boardroom and talked to our board members, they're really, what they want to know is that not only do I have cyber expertise, but that I understand the business that we're in and that I can help, lead the organization to figure out what matters most, what do our patients and consumers expect out of us, and what's important to the business and its growth and where it's headed, and then how is cybersecurity and the protections we put in place protecting that and allowing that to move forward. Because we know every other day we read about a new headline of either a significant operational impact from a cyber event or a data breach. All of those distract from the mission of the organization. And so they want to know that the security organization isn't there just to put, protections around everything, but that it's really there to support where they're going as a business. So that's some of the evolution I've seen, and certainly, as I, again, coming into a new role in a new company, spending just as much time getting my arms around the technology of our organization as I am around our business, our customers, our patients, those that we serve, because that's just as important.
Yeah, and let's pivot to the customer for a moment now that we've got kind of your inside view on the organization. And so obviously healthcare and the industry itself is a very personal industry. I mentioned before my desire to do video conferencing with my medical professionals, which is amazing because I travel quite a bit, and so I can be on the road and still have that connectivity. And so when you think about the importance of being a trusted provider to consumers, and obviously that's the role that Abbott continues to play, and others, how can you think about what can a healthcare organization or individuals working for them take advantage of the convergence of technology in this industry? I mean, obviously, people like myself love to do it, I also recognize there's a lot of consumers who maybe are like, I still kind of want to go into the doctor, or I want to make sure I'm physically seeing someone. And so what do you think is the kind of happy medium for how we can continue to move forward while at the same time maintaining a reputation of trust? Because a lot of this comes down to not just trust in the professionals, but trust in the technology, trust in the security of that technology, et cetera. So how do you think we as both professionals and consumers alike can really take advantage of technology while at the same time kind of feeling protected?
Yeah, and we're at such a, to what you're saying, we're at such a pivotal point in kind of history right now. The research shows that about 90% of the data in the world was created in the last 2 years. There's more than 20 billion connected devices out there, and something like 4 billion or so internet users. I mean, those numbers are staggering, and they just multiply year over year because we have so much opportunity to connect, and so many more things becoming quote unquote smart. And that brings us wonderful things. You said it yourself, of the conveniences and the mobility that it gives us. In Abbott, we look at the ability for devices to really help people live healthier lives and understand their conditions and have better health outcomes because of it. I mean, these are just amazing opportunities that we have that we've never had before. But it is also about ensuring that we create the resiliency for all of those new devices to ensure that they can't be used for harm. I think the other thing is, as I said, from a data perspective, it's all the data that we're also gathering or generating, I should say, off of all these connected devices comes with a lot of data, and that is critically important to protect. And I think as consumers, and then certainly as we put our patients and our consumers first, to think about, what do they expect? Well, they expect to know, what are you doing with how are you protecting me? What are you doing with my data? How are you using it? Do I have options and choice? And of course, we see this in the privacy discussion and where those are going, in countries all over the world. Those are the key questions. And then you put that in the center of how do you build your programs and how do you operate with those in mind? I think if you do that, you can't go wrong. If you put those at the center of it, and then you as a consumer, if those are the questions you are asking of the organizations and the companies that you are entrusting with your health, with your information, then we're all going to come to a place that says the importance and the priority goes into protecting that.
Yeah, and I think both Abbott as well as myself are heavily involved in Deloitte's Tech Trends report. And speaking of data and values in an organization, I know one of the things that we talk about in Tech Trends is around ethical technologies. And certainly Abbott continues to be patient-first mindset and the role of trust in making and maintaining the success that Abbott's had for all these years. And so anything you could touch on around ethical technology, or perhaps even just how do you understand kind of what are the dilemmas? How do you look at how ethical trust around technology might have an impact on things like emerging technology, right? Things that we don't even know are coming down the pike. But I do believe, obviously, we're headed into even more advanced medical care, even more advanced patient care when you think about that. And so with Abbott, obviously putting patient first, and even in what you just said in response to the last question, we think about the consumer and the patient first obviously helps us gain that trust. But I think when you also think about that, are we starting to question, where is the data? What do I do? How do I know what's going on with that? And then how do you ensure from a brand perspective that Abbott and you as the CISO are kind of giving that comfort, if you will, back as it relates to the trust necessary for that?
It is an incredibly important topic and we talk about it, quite a bit at very senior levels of the organization, because where we are headed is very much personalized health, meaning I want, as an individual, to have more insights into what makes me healthy or what can help me be more healthy, what my results show me, and that's all driving towards bringing potentially different components of data together. And so that's, of course, where, we are as, very much in the privacy discussion about health data. And there's power in it, but there's responsibility in it too. So that's where much of the discussion goes when you think about this space.
So it's incredibly fascinating when you think about all the types of data that comes together, and then what aggregated data might be able to tell us. And I love the theory, again, as a patient myself, on patient outcomes, because I'm always trying to figure out how can I get ahead of it and be more proactive about understanding perhaps things that are going on with me or environmentally or based on even just technology or capability. And so do you think there's also, just given the wealth of data that may be coming together in order to really drive this patient outcome or patient first mentality, is there an opportunity, and perhaps Abbott is already there, leveraging artificial intelligence or machine learning, because there is just going to be, if not today, more and more and more data, right? Whether we're getting them from wearables or whether we're getting from imported from our own medical files, aggregating that together and being able to think about the proactive means of how you're coming up with these patient outcomes.
The only way that you can work with that volume of data is to start to use some of the AI and machine learning. What I also, would emphasize that along with that, though, comes the responsibility of ensuring that the models being created have been vetted and that we're really thinking about where bias could be introduced into it. Because at the end of the day, you still have to teach a model, or you start with a model. And of course, we've seen this in other areas where AI has been applied. Well, and even in some of the healthcare, I read an article about some AI being applied to reading images, or I'm sorry, I think it was in the dermatology world, and looking at different kind of skin conditions and being able to recognize it through an image search. But what they found was that the majority of the images that were initially submitted into the machine to learn from were from Caucasian skin, and so it underdiagnosed those people of color because it didn't know how to recognize the same kind of rash or the same kind of skin condition on other color skin. And so those are some of the, when you talk about ethical, those are some of the ethical concerns as well about recognizing the power, but also the limitations or the of the models that we build to make sure that the outcomes really are better for everybody, not based on just the information that we've fed.
And because we're talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and the example that you just gave really also underscores the need for cyber talent, because often when you bring up AI and machine learning, and it's not just cyber talent, but when you talk about those, often industry will say, and people will say, well, if you're going to use artificial intelligence or machine learning, do we actually really need talent? And your example obviously underscores the need to be able to have people also engaged in this. And so on the topic of people, how are you dealing with the cyber talent? Obviously, there's a huge shortage of what we would deem as traditional cyber talent. Obviously, it continues to be a priority given the amount of data and technology and patient-first data that we're even talking about here in this podcast. And so from your experience, one, how do you look at not only building the right cyber talent and the right teams, but also retaining them, particularly because of the need for talent everywhere, similar like cyber's everywhere, the talent needed is everywhere. And so how do you help build that team and then retain them, for your ongoing cyber needs?
The techniques that I've seen work successfully is not only acquiring talent and experienced talent, but developing it, obviously. I mean, when you look at whatever the numbers are at, will be 1 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs out there. Everybody's kind of competing for the same people with experience. So you have to create that pipeline. You have to develop it. You have to identify some maybe non-traditional kind of backgrounds. I mean, does everybody have to have a computer science degree or a technology degree? Not necessarily. Not when we're talking about some of the spaces like understanding our business and how to think about the risk of it. And, there's so many disciplines in cybersecurity that don't necessarily need the deep, computer science background. Some do, but not all do. And I also would argue, does everybody really have to have a 4-year degree to come into our field? Back in my JP Morgan days of an individual that we recruited out of college that interned with us, then did 2 years in the development program and was just one of our best incident responders after just, a couple years of school while he was still an intern. So why wouldn't I be able to look to some of those other, associate degrees and other tracks to get our talent in and train up as they're, getting into the field. And so those have to be some of the techniques that we use to build this workforce. And I've, been fortunate in each of the organizations I've been at that there has been a very strong talent pipeline with a recognition of specifically bringing in those interested in being in the cybersecurity field. I mean, the good news is, I have to say, is, back when I started, that cybersecurity was not a thing, a field that you chose. You just kind of fell into it. Like I my first management role, I was 25 and I managed, I think, 6 men that were at least 15 or more years older than me, and half of them had come from the mainframe era. So, this was not, this wasn't a field that coming out of college most people went into. Now that's really different. There is obvious excitement and interest in doing so. And then I think what I see here at being at Abbott is one of the things that we, in the retention category, that we have going for us is the connection to mission. I'm never going to be able to compete on salary alone. Somebody is going to be out there offering more money, but I can compete on purpose and reason to be here and excitement in what we're doing. That's one of the retention opportunities, is make it a environment where people really connect with the company and with what we're here to do.
I love the connection to mission, and certainly connecting and competing on purpose, I think, was the way that you said it. So I think to the extent, particularly, I mean, obviously the studies show, I mean, not just millennials, but individuals who have more commitment and connection to things like purpose and obviously interest and passion, I would agree completely, will give you a higher degree, hopefully, of not only retention, but hopefully garnering others. I don't know about you, but I see people who, when they're like, wow, I really want to be in that group, right? So maybe you get a little bit of group think too, because more and more people will see that connection, that purpose, that passion, and then ultimately want to be in that group too. And so I definitely think there's a way to also continue to garner additional people or interest when you start to see that and lead by that example. So kudos to you for leading from the front on that topic.
It's funny that you say that, because one of my maybe non-documented metrics, but as from my leadership team that we track, is how many people from other parts of the organization want to come work for cybersecurity. And we truly, that is for me a marker for, are we doing the right things? Are they see the right things of us because they want to come work for us? So absolutely.
I love that. I literally took a note for that. How many people want to leave some other place in the organization to come work for you? That's a great soft or hard metric. So I love it. I love that completely. So now let's get into what I like to call, is always one of my favorite parts of the podcast, which is our rapid fire questions. So feel free to answer one statement, one word, 10 paragraphs. It's completely up to you, just to think about things a little bit differently. And certainly when you think about passion, and obviously you and I are both incredibly passionate about what we do, obviously both personally and professionally. When you think about how to be an aspirational leader to others, what do you think is something, if you were to be mentoring someone or telling someone about being an aspirational leader, why is that so important? And maybe how did you learn to be that, or is it just something that's kind of evolved over time?
It has evolved over time. I would say that I have always strived to be a genuine and authentic leader, and somebody that is approachable and people know me and what makes me tick. But I would say that my leadership has become more intentional as I've gotten into larger roles. So actually reflecting on what I want to be as a leader and what I want to project to the organization. So I think it isn't necessarily something I always had in mind, but as I've gotten into greater levels of responsibility, it is intentional because I understand the impact of being in the role that I'm in. And I actually had a really wonderful opportunity when I left my last position and I was leaving the organization, to hear from a lot of people who reached out just to wish me well, but also in some cases they shared with me what I had helped them with in their career, or what they had observed. And it was striking to me of how many mentions of a role model. And I don't know that I ever would put those terms on me. Leader, yes, and all of that, but not necessarily role model. And so that has now become also focal as I think about how I go through my responsibility and how I come to work every day, is recognizing there are a lot of eyes on me. and I have an opportunity to have a positive impact on people, either directly, that I'm working with, or those that just kind of see me from afar. And that is important to me, that is, front and center with how I lead. And so that means that, integrity is number one. What I say is what I do. And I have empathy for those around me, knowing that I don't have the same shared life experiences with everybody, but I can try to understand what those are and bring those into how we attack our mission here at the organization. So those are the things that come to mind for me every day as I, sit in this role and know the responsibilities that I have.
And one thing, if I can pull a little bit of thread on, because I find it intriguing around the concept of role model, as I too would have never said to my young self, you're going to be a role model one day, or did I aspire, or did I think, or even candidly, when someone first said that to me, that I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm just who I am. And so the way in which you speak about it, now recognizing that and be much more proactive of understanding that and what that responsibility is in a very positive way while still being genuine and authentic. I guess when you think about that and the fact that you are indeed a role model, how do you or how would you encourage future female and or minority and or other leaders? I mean, just the population, when you think about that, because again, I don't think either one of us set out and said, I'm certain of myself when I was, 18, 20, 30 even, hey, I'm going to be a role model. But how do you help encourage others, particularly those that, when I think about our cyber workforce, how do you encourage them to, really kind of stand up and either A, look for other role models that might be able to help them through this journey, or B, maybe just to continue to have that confidence in being genuine and authentic so that as they build their own careers, they too will eventually become role models?
What people I would encourage to think about is, you may not even realize what you can do or the impact that you can have on others and the path that you can set out, just because you are uniquely you, and somebody can find something in you that they can relate to and go, oh, well, maybe I also, because of that, can be in that space. Because I reflect on, for myself, I actually, after the age of, once I got into my kind of first cybersecurity role, I never worked for a woman. I never had a woman in anywhere of my management chain. And so 18, 19 years of work, never had a female. And so, while I didn't set out to think about that as, kind of a role model, I recognize now, that I sit in a spot and I hopefully have some impact and some influence on those that, are underrepresented in one way or another, and particularly our young women, to say, oh yeah, there, I see something in that person. And I too, if I want to, could be a CISO eventually. And so whether it's your gender, whether it's your race, whether it's how you learn and communicate, whether, whatever makes you unique, you just don't even know who might look at you and go, I relate to that. And that now inspires me to keep going. So it's at least kind of embracing the things that make you unique that could also then have influence on those around you. And not to, kind of weigh anybody down with that kind of responsibility, but to just feel pretty excited about what that could mean.
I love it. And since you threw out a tagline, which maybe you didn't even know you were saying it as I'm jotting down notes while we speak, but you are uniquely you. And I do think all of us are unique, and sometimes that when you maybe don't even think something that's a strength of yours, others will see that in you and really be able to help reflect on that at some point in your life, personally or professionally, as you look at, wow, that really helped somebody, or it helped me, or it changed my life. And again, you just never really know. So I love you are uniquely you. And so with that, I love to end the podcast with one question, which is, I never usually like to say, how do you define success or failure? It's more about what would be your bumper sticker. So, you had the you are uniquely you earlier when we're talking about reflection. Is there a bumper sticker or a slogan that would define you in terms of all the qualities and capabilities that you bring to bear?
I would definitely borrow from a quote attributed to Gandhi that says, be the change that you wish to see in the world. That would be my bumper sticker. Just go and, embody what you want to see in the world around you. Lead by example, put that out in the world?
Well, I'm going to put that out in the ether today, because you have certainly changed my life for the better in being able to not only spend this time with me on the podcast, but also in sharing it with all of our listeners. So thank you so much for your time, Betsy. I really do appreciate your authentic self, bringing your transparent experience and background to us as we engage on this journey. So again, thank you not only for joining me today, but also for being able to put that change out into the ether. So I appreciate that. And certainly with this, thank you again for being here today.
Well, thank you. This was truly a pleasure and an honor to get to talk to you today. So thank you, Deb.
What an authentic and passionate conversation with Betsy. From her get after it mentality and her advice around building a professional network, her words of wisdom are truly inspirational. Betsy's insight on patient first and patient outcomes highlights her connection to the mission, which not only enables cyber within our organization, but also a place where people want to work and evolve our thinking regarding cyber talent. I'd be remiss not to mention her tagline, seeking to be the change you wish to see in the world. Advice I think we can all aspire to achieve. If you like what you heard, stay tuned for more discussions with cyber leaders as we continue our cyber series, and to hear from some new hosts as we expand the podcast to also feature chief audit executives, chief risk officers, and other executives. Check out additional episodes on your favorite podcast channel and subscribe to our podcast at Deloitte.com/US Resilient. And feel free to connect with me on Twitter at Golden Hokie. That's GO1DENHOKIE. Thank you so much for listening.